Man, it's a beautiful morning. July 10th, 2024, and I'm out here in Smyth County, Virginia, to see the one and only Jim Minick. Now, Jim and I met a few months ago, back in March, when he came into Silva for the Appalachian Studies Conference in Cullowhee. And because City Lights Bookstore, where I work, is right down the road, we hosted a bunch of readings in concert with that conference because we had so many wonderful writers in town, so why not bring them over for more events? And Jim was part of that group of writers that read at the store. And I'd never really heard about Jim other than in passing, with people mentioning him and his work. Hadn't read any of his work. But even before we met, when we were emailing back and forth in February, he mentioned that he was also a huge Willa Cather and Eudora Welty fan. And if you know anything about me, those are pretty much the only words you need to say for us to be friends. So I was really excited to meet Jim now that I knew we had a kindred spirit, at least for Willa and Welty. And so we met. Jim came and read from his latest book of poetry, The Intimacy of Spoons, and it was incredible. And I really liked hearing Jim read his poetry, and it inspired me to read all of his books. And when you look at his collection of work, it doesn't make a lot of sense to an outsider. Over the next few months, I read his poetry, his memoir about starting a blueberry farm with his wife, an oral history of the deadliest tornado ever in the state of Kansas, and also his incredible novel, Fire is Your Water. But the most important thing about those collection of books that he's written is that they make sense to him. And here's what I really want to drive home about Jim Minick. As much as I loved reading a very talented writer and the way he put together words and structured stories, the thing I most appreciated reading Jim's work was understanding the life of a person who wrote stories that he really wanted to write. And he didn't care if they made sense to the rest of the world. Jim's one of those people that clearly, if he has a burning desire to write a story, if he's really curious about something, then he's going to go after it. And he's going to do it, regardless of whether or not it's going to be popular or will get him national acclaim. That doesn't matter to Jim. What matters are the stories. And I really respect that about him. And I thought it was aligned how before this trip, I just got back from Massachusetts, where I went to Emily Dickinson's house for the first time. And I thought about Emily Dickinson writing poems in little old Amherst, Massachusetts, with no guarantee that her poems would reach the world and affect so many people's lives. She couldn't have known that. But she wrote anyway, because she had a burning desire to say something. And I think there is a really great lesson to be learned in that. You know, she wrote the poem, I'm Nobody, Who Are You? That perhaps there is a huge power in being a nobody, in not having to appease masses of people and constantly think about, what do all these other people want? And hardly ever think about what you want. And I've taken a lot of inspiration from Emily Dickinson's life and the work that I do and the way that I live. And I think Jim's the same way. I think we can learn a lot from Jim. In fact, if I ever have children, I would tell them, look at Jim Minick's life and model yourself after that. Don't try to be Jim Minick. No, that's not what I'm saying. But in the way that Jim Minick has stayed true to himself in his life and in his writing, you do that for you. And I think you'll have a really good life. Because what you lose in trying to become somebody for everybody is the soul of everything. And Jim hasn't lost that. And I think his stories contain that soul in a way that if you read them, your life's going to be better off for it. I know mine is. And I'm really glad that I get to be here with him in Virginia today. Get to be outside in a barn having this conversation as Jim Minick would have it. And I'm just so lucky that I get to meet people like Jim, that they're willing to spend time with me and talk to me about these books. I'm really stoked to see what books he has on that he's going to put on the bed. And I really hope you read his books. Hit me up at City Lights, email us, call us, stop over at the store, and I'll tell you all about why you should read Jim Minick. But I'm driving here on the back roads of Virginia, Southwest Virginia, and it's so beautiful. And I can't help but be amazed at all the people you can become friends with by reading books and loving books and sharing yourself through these stories. This is just the best thing ever, man. You're listening to Books on the Bed, where I travel through the country asking our hosts, if I came to your town and stayed at your house, what books would you put on my bed? Each host will share 6 books for me to carry with me on the journey of my life. And I'm here to share those books with you. As we go, we're building a digital library with every book put on every bed across the country. And who knows, maybe someday, the world. We are trying to share as many diverse stories as possible to part a curtain between us and bring us closer to each other. We hope these books and conversations make a meaningful difference in your life. Thank you for listening and being with us on this journey. Well, the first thing I do now, because I think it's important, is to start with my gifts to you.
Oh.
So I have a stack for you. Part of the way that I picked these books, okay, is based on this quote you had from an interview. Right. I don't know when. Had to have been relatively recently, but you said read widely. In your chosen genre, yes, but also in other genres, cultures, and disciplines. I love digging into science, trying to understand that language, learning what a scientist knows, how they think and use language. And as a white, cisgender, heterosexual man, I try to read beyond those labels to see how others experience this world, how I might also become a better person and writer by understanding these other views. Also read deeply. Find authors you admire, how they shape sentences, and how they shape a life. I love that. Study them. Read once for pleasure, twice to understand that pleasure. And then read, in quotes, widely what's not in books or on screens. This is very important. When a sapsucker keeps visiting the same pine tree, what's she doing? How long do those wells of sap flow before the tree heals? What other creatures come to sup? What does the tree think of this all? Or, we live with several bears nearby. So I've been learning the language of the bear. What a track reveals about size and intent, or how a playful cub bends a sapling to the ground. I've never witnessed this, but finally figured out how so many bent trees came about. And it's fun to imagine, isn't it? As for voice, write letters. Explain yourself to others, including people long gone, or your younger or older selves. The letters might never get sent, but the letter writer begins to hear that unique quality we call voice, which is really one's personality in the air and on the page. And that discovery is a gift. I love that answer. This just summed up, I think, a lot of your work and your life. Mm-hmm. And so I picked the gifts that I think can help you continue to read widely, read deeply, and with authors, I think, that share a kindred spirit with you in what you appreciate, not only in the world, but in literature. So we're going to start with those.
Okay.
And you're the first person I've gotten 3 books. I've typically done 2, but one of them's very small in size, but not in content. So this first one, and you can open it, and I need to remember to keep telling people what book it is since we're not videotaped, you know?
Right.
Because I keep sometimes just getting excited and then not saying the title.
I can read the title.
And the author.
This is really sweet of y'all. And pretty wrapping paper. The Song of Everything by Glennis Redmond. All right. A poet's exploration of South Carolina's state parks. Oh, sweet.
So Glennis is the poet laureate of Greenville, South Carolina.
Okay. I've never met her.
And-
I've heard, and I think I've read some of her. Yeah, I've read, I don't remember where, but some of her work.
I just felt like even the title, The Song of Everything,
Yeah.
is so much
thank
aligned
you.
with your poems and what you
Yeah.
write about in terms of birdsong and listening to the world. And the backstory of this book is really powerful. You know, Glennis is, I believe, like a 3-time cancer survivor.
Oh, wow. I didn't
And
know
during
that.
COVID, she was struggling and she had a young grandson and they were just boxed in.
Wow.
And so she said, you know what? We're going to go outside.
Wow.
We're going to visit all of these parks. And to herself, and she might have shared them on social media, but she was taking pictures and writing a poem at each park about each park, those excursions. And the publisher of this book randomly saw that on social media and said, what if we did a book together? The Song of Everything.
Wow.
So I just feel like you would appreciate Glennis. I think
Yes.
you would be friends. And I imagine you rambling around parks together and
That
listening
would
to
be-
birds. You'll like a lot of those poems.
I would love, yes. Thank you.
So that's the first one,
All right. I love that title too. And the cover.
right?
Yeah.
It's so,
Yeah.
it's so you. Okay, so the second one, this really bothered me. It gave me anxiety because I wasn't sure I was going to get it, because I know we talked about this author back in March when we met at City Lights, but I could not remember if you said you read this.
Okay.
So if you did, you can still have it, but I have another book to make up for it in case you did. I just can't remember because I've sold this book to so many people,
Oh,
and I talk about it with so many people because it's one of my favorites of all time.
I kind of remember the conversation, but I don't remember the book.
Yeah,
So,
I think we probably talked about quite a few.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I have read it.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
The Good Lord Bird by James McBride.
Well, part of the reason I wanted to bring it anyway is, if I'm not mistaken, is your family connected? Were they in Kansas at some point way back?
Yes.
Abilene, Kansas?
And now, yeah. Yeah, so.
And so I thought, well, this book
Right.
starts in Kansas and
Right.
makes its way to Virginia.
Right.
So,
Yep.
okay. I knew that you had, I'm glad I got a third book then, because I just couldn't remember. But anyway,
Yeah.
that book had a similar, there was a passage in Fire is Your Water. Remember when Cicero's talking about a feather?
Sure. Yeah.
I think I
Yeah.
actually have it.
Yeah. Oh, that's one I usually read.
I think I
Yeah.
have it marked.
Yeah.
We'll have you read it after I give you the
Okay.
second one, because I'm going to have you read a few things.
Okay.
But the last one, again, maybe this is way out of region, but someone that
That's fine.
still might be on your radar enough to have read this book.
This is like kind of the lottery for both of us.
I know. Look how many books. There are probably 18 on this table. This is fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. I tried to limit it to 6, and then
It got carried
and
away.
then I got carried. And I
How
said
could you?
13. Oh. I've taught this one.
Okay. So I'm 1 for 3.
So that's all right, but I love this. In fact,
That's
I
okay.
thought about bringing this. I
Yeah.
used to the Clan of the One-Breasted Women. I just absolutely love that. And then
Okay.
just the whole idea of, so the book is Refuge by Terry Tempest Williams. I really thought about bringing it.
Okay. Well, this is
Wouldn't
okay.
that
At
have been
least,
funny?
at least I'm okay. At least I'm aligned with things that you would enjoy.
Thank
See,
you.
but now I'm going to
That's
have to
very
get.
sweet.
Now I'm going to have to get a 4th and send it to you.
No,
I can't.
no,
I can't
no,
have.
no.
I can't
That's
have only
fine.
one that you haven't read. That's going to
No,
bother me.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
But yeah. So I share books with authors because, I mean, yes, you're talking about these books, which are going to be a gift to many people who read them because you're
Yeah.
talking about them. But also, your work has meant a lot to me over the last few months.
Well,
Like,
thank
it doesn't
you.
seem like I met you only such a short time ago because I've been reading your books, so it makes you feel, like you're getting to know an author.
Yeah.
And just prepping with your family history and where you've come from. It's like it's been really inspiring in a lot of ways. And you're just a good writer. I
thank you.
enjoy reading your books,
Thank you.
and I like that you are someone who has not boxed yourself in.
Yeah.
and said,
Yeah.
hey, I'm going to find this one thing that works for me, and that's all I'm going to do. I mean, come on. I've read your poems. I've read a novel. I've read about your blueberry farm and building that out. And I read about a tornado in Kansas. I mean, that's a pretty diverse group of books that you've written. And so I just want to say thank you for that. And I hope that I can continue to sell them often in City Lights. And people have unreal respect for you around the region. So
thank you.
Just, it's really, really an honor to be here with you.
Well, thank you. The diversity of what you were just saying about all the diversity of genres and subjects has not been great for career, quote unquote, but that's all right. I mean, I learned pretty quickly that I could not make a living from writing. So, and I didn't really try.
Yeah.
So,
see, but there's something about that. I've always been attracted to folks who recognize that and just do what they want anyway.
Yeah.
Because the great thing about your books is they're so true to self.
Right.
And like, could you have tried to write books that, if you do Fire is Your Water 5 times, right, maybe like that type of novel that you start to get like a reputation. But I just think it's really cool that you said, hey, no, I want to write what I really want to write about. And so much of it is connected to your family's history and just things that really matter to you. So, I'm glad you didn't choose the other way. And I think, honestly, some authors, it disappoints when you can tell they're going that way.
Right.
Where they're trying to do career writing as opposed to...
Right.
And I don't want to say it's not true or authentic.
Right.
But you definitely have to compromise.
Right.
And you just haven't. And I respect that. And for me, it's been a joy to read that diversity because I think I was in like a very narrow literary fiction groove. And then starting to read your books, it's just like I was going all over the place. So it's helped me. I've read a lot more poetry since reading The Intimacy of Spoons, for sure.
All right.
It's kind of just like, oh yeah, I do like these things. let's read some more poetry and let's do some nonfiction. So, but I think to start, I want to have you read a few things.
Okay.
I told you about bringing The Intimacy of Spoons. I don't know if you...
I did. Somewhere.
Have a copy of that. I'd love for you to read Why Birds.
Okay.
And then also the Briar's Last Days.
Okay.
Those are 2 of my favorites of yours. And people will understand when you read these, I think a lot of what you're about. But part of how I want to frame this up is I just told you I was at your blueberry farm, or well, near your former blueberry farm in Floyd County, Virginia.
That's very, very sweet of you and pretty funny and kind of like a pilgrimage, it sounds like. And I would have loved to. I mean, the bushes are still there.
I'm so mad I didn't get there.
Yeah.
I tried so hard just to follow the path.
I could have given you directions.
Yeah. But it was really interesting to travel there because, when I turned right on Alum Ridge, and then you have to do another sharp right to stay on it.
Yeah.
And right when I made that turn, in the big bright sun, was this gigantic hawk soaring over the fields. And I was like, oh, this is a good sign. And then I keep driving, and I go down Leicester, and, at a certain point, the gravel road, first of all, this does actually, that drive provided some support to the argument of the truck driver that said, I'm not going all the way to your house. To deliver these blueberry bushes because it was it got pretty windy and up and down, and it was a gravel road. But at some point down in one of them hollers, there was this white horse all alone.
Wow.
Just waiting for me. Yeah. And I stopped and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a daydream, and it was so quiet and it was so beautiful. It was like the perfect light coming through the trees. And even though I didn't get directly to your farm, I thought it was important I always feel like it's important to try to, we always say this, we want to see things from other people's perspectives.
Right.
But books really can only help you do that so much.
Right. And
to actually be in the vicinity of where you said, you know what, I'm going to live out this blueberry farm dream. It gives even more perspective of just like the feeling of it, you know, that first day when the bushes are coming and clearing the forest. Like I'm thinking about all these things and I'm actually seeing where it was. So that was really important. But then it also made me think about your childhood in Newburgh, Pennsylvania, which I'm not crazy, I promise. I hadn't planned that trip to Massachusetts when we first planned this.
All right.
But on the way back,
You went through.
I took a detour to Newburgh, Pennsylvania.
Oh,
And I had to see where you grew up because fire is your water
right.
is so a part of that
Right.
experience.
When you said you went to the blueberry farm or tried, I was like, well, has he done that with that one? And it's like, God, I wish I could give him directions more for that one too.
So
and I didn't know this growing up, but there's a couple different Newburgh, Pennsylvania. So
I think I went to the right one.
Okay.
Because is your family in the Otterbein Cemetery?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Whoa. So you found that? Isn't that a pretty cemetery? Yeah.
And I know some people think it's like, why would you do that? But for me, again, it's all part of understanding. And there's something about even being at a cemetery like that to help understand the weight behind your stories.
Yeah.
I mean, these people are so important to you and have influenced you for so long. And it's such a tiny place. You know, this has such an outsized impact, but that no one would think that. No one would understand it unless they've been there. And so, I went there and I don't know if these are accurate pictures.
I saw you had this. Yeah. So
can you talk about who that is?
Sure. So back to the Otterbein cemetery. I just buried my parents there just in the past 7 months. So I've been there too much. But my grandparents are buried there, and one of my uncles, and then my great grandparents on both sides, and then just all the people I grew up with, a bunch of the people I grew up with. Whoa. And so so this picture is of Ida Franklin Minick. Do you know that?
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, I found it. I was searching.
Okay.
Yep.
And I would guess, well, she didn't finish high school. I think she only had an 8th grade education, but I would guess she's all dressed up. She has a mink, very long mink, I don't know what you call that, around her neck that I can't imagine her owning because she was very poor. And I would guess this is maybe before her wedding, but she was my great-grandmother, paternal grandmother, and she was the faith healer, powwow doctor that I based the novel on. And so she died when I was 4, so my first memory is of sitting on her lap. And growing up, I had all these stories about her and healing, and she was kind of the matchmaker for my parents. So So the reason that book is a novel is because I had 4 or 5 generations of stories that covered at least 30 years, and I couldn't figure out how to make it nonfiction.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So I realized when I figured out that, so I don't know how much you want me to talk about this. So the novel opens with a barn fire, and that actually happened. And Ida and her daughter-in-law, Sarah, my grandmother, were the only 2 adults home at the time. And they went in and saved all the animals, and they actually did save them all. That doesn't happen in the novel. I made it a little more dramatic. But afterwards, during the fire, my grandmother grabbed all the milk cows were chained in, so the chains had to be grabbed and released. And the last couple of chains were so hot from the fire that my grandmother burned, ovals in her hands from the chains. So
that's real too. Wow.
Yeah. And so I would always get my Uncle Harry to tell me this story. And like one of the last times he told it, we just kind of sat with it for a while, and he said, they had to get Uncle Mark, who was a distant cousin, to come in and heal Sarah, his mother's hands. And I said, why didn't Ida do it? And he said, I don't know. And that kind of just, and I dwelled on that for probably 2 or 3 years. And I finally realized I could make it a novel when, with the question of how does the healer find healing? What happens when the healer can no longer heal? So that question then let me make it into a novel. So,
and it is a doozy of an intro. I mean, that barn scene is so intense, and it is dramatic. But it also, I love books where there's some sort of shaken faith.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's important because everybody, whether they're religious or not, I think has that time in life where you start questioning things, or in this case, like, why did I lose that power? And you're just like, you feel like, Ada's lost a huge part of herself. And, in the midst of all this, I'm reading and I'm realizing, this is a family story. So, this is coming from generations of tales. And I think it's a really interesting exploration of faith. And I'm all about talking birds.
Okay.
I think that the Cicero angle was such a unique way to go, because he comes up, every, I don't know how many pages, but it's like you do these chapters and then bam, here comes Cicero talking. Can you talk about why? Well, you love birds.
Right.
Okay? And we will read the poems, I promise. But why a talking bird?
I resisted that for a long time because I didn't, for one, this is my first novel, and two, is like a talking bird. I didn't know, I'm fine with magic realism or whatever, but I didn't know if I could do it, and I didn't know how it would go, how it would come out.
It went great, by the way.
Well, thank you. And it was a lot of fun. And then when I finally embraced it, it was like he almost took over, right? Cicero, the bird. So,
you could tell. It was Cicero was alive in that thing,
right? It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
At first it was going to be a crow because I just Jeff Danny Marion. Do you know that writer? He's a poet from Tennessee who died a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. But he has one children's book called Hello Crow. And I love both the book and the title.
Yeah.
I love the rhyme. And it's like, so I was going to have Hello Crow, kind of it'd be a crow. But then I started thinking about ravens and learning more about ravens and how just much more commanding and brilliant they are. And so I couldn't have Hello Raven. So that's where I finally picked the name Cicero.
Yeah.
Plus Cicero has a lot of history as far as the the scholar who talked too much.
Yeah. I loved that. Like even thinking about what are we going to name him, and is it a male or female bird plays into it that we don't really know at first. So I just thought Cicero was such a great addition to that book, and really, I think, enlivened it. It bolstered the story in a way that I was surprised how much I was looking forward to hearing what Cicero had to say in between. So Cicero might have taken over. And then came through us. But this is just such a good book. And the reason I brought the pictures, it just seems like that place, those people have a really, really big imprint on you, your heart, and what motivates you.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about how Newburgh and that life still carries forth in your own today, even here in Virginia, like what you take with you from that time or keep with you?
Sure, I'll try. So Newburgh is very small. It's like 300 people. And I grew up at the edge of town in a brick ranch that my parents built a few years before I was born. And they were both teachers, but the farm that my dad grew up on was just a quarter mile away. And I walked there every day after school with my BB gun, shooting cans and starlings and English sparrows, and then helping with the milking. And so, that, I guess, just the love of being outside, the love of good work with your hands, and then just the generational appreciation. I've had fun trying to learned the family history, like going back for these funerals. I was like, my grandmother, the woman who burned her hands, was a Schumann, and she had 9 siblings, I think.
Oh.
And so I knew, I was related. I knew all these people I was related to growing up through the Schumann, but then there's a Franklin that I'm also related through. So, this is totally...
Yeah, no, keep going.
It's
I love it.
Bizarre details, but I'm related to them through both the Schumanns and the Franklins. So,
Wow.
it's like, very, very distant, but, it just fascinates me. Just, but not even just the connection, but just how these people lived and how that's shaped us and shaped the land and how that all those things have changed over the years. So
because you used to go to your grandparents' blueberry farm, right? Didn't they have
yeah,
one?
yeah. So that dairy farm that we could see out the window and that I would walk to, that my grandfather planted maybe a quarter acre, half acre. I don't think it's bigger than that. In the 1950s, before I was born, and so I grew up eating them, and then as I got older, he would employ me to shoot the groundhogs and mow under,
First job.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think it's interesting because, you talk about it's a tiny town, but that small part of land in your life, I mean, you eventually had your own blueberry farm.
Right.
Not too far from here in Floyd County, Virginia. And you were a teacher.
Right.
at Radford. So it's like that ethic, I think, of the land and being outside and working with your hands and paying attention, but also being a teacher. It's like in your blood.
Right.
And that's epigenetic, man. So it just was cool to think about.
Yeah.
Went to all these different spaces, and now where you live here, I like people that make sense. And I know some people might think on the other end, I don't know if I do, but you can trace your life. Yeah. You've held to those values, it seems, in a way that not a lot of people can do. A lot of people reject rural values. Even where I live now in Franklin, it's like kids will leave. They don't want to be a part of that. But for you, it's like, just seemed like, those things stayed with you.
Yeah, I wanted to leave for some other reasons, but I didn't. At the same time, I was struggling, I'd wanted to stay too. So,
that ambivalence, man. It'll get you. It's a hard decision to make.
Yeah.
But no, this is cool. So I do want to, now that we're talking about your stories in your life, let's start with, we said, why a talking bird? Well, let's read the poem.
Okay.
Why birds?
All right. Why birds? Their songs, their brilliance, their intricate nests and abundant curiosities, their dawn chorus calling us to feel breath cross chords and know the need to wake the sun with song. How they make me remember the sound of the gone ivory bill I learned from listening to LPs with my grandfather, or my first bluebird, its soft song leading me to a hollow post filled with 4 blue eggs, something so startling and secret. Or the pileated that flew across a country road at eye level, and we, not yet married, and you yanking the wheel back across the yellow line as we crested a hill. You knew then I was mad with love for you and for birds, and you still said yes. And now, over 30 years later, we're still in love, and even this evening, he pointed to the pileated that cackled and flapped by our window.
Whew. As we have this bird song right next to us, and the good Lord bird.
Yeah,
ivory billed. Yeah. Right in front of us. And that's, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That was...
Like, as I started reading, I was like, oh, there's the indigo bunting, and there's a towhee out there singing, so, yeah. Yeah,
you love birds, you know birds, and you also know trees really well. I found that part of the research of your life really interesting, of how much you can... You are good at identifying trees, and I think at one point when you went to grad school, you mentioned that most of the students were younger in your program, and you identified a tree, and they're like, how can you tell that's what it is?
Yeah.
But then you were like, oh, I didn't even know that was it edible? No, what was the thing
Right,
that you learned about it? I'm forgetting which tree it was.
It was
but
a red bud.
Yes.
And I could, so, most of these students were, like, I went back to grad school when I was 49, and most of them were in their 20s still.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I would have known, well, maybe I knew a red bud, but not well when I was in my 20s. But then, like, after that event, I learned from reading that you can eat red bud flowers because it's in the bean family. And it was like, I didn't know that. And I mean, I try to know some stuff, but there's so much you don't, or I don't know. Yeah.
Who taught you about birds and trees? Or was that a self-study?
A little of both.
Okay.
I mean, my grandfather sparked that interest, but I don't know how much he really knew. But I guess, none of my family really loved birds as much as I do. But my parents both would ask me when I get home from riding the bus to school, when I was just, like 5 or 6 years old, what did you see? And I would always, especially ringneck pheasants, those were released by the state for hunting. And so they were very exotic, but they were very fun to look for. But so, just that encouragement to look and be curious.
Accidentally raising a poet there.
Sure. Yeah.
Can imagine you watching.
Yeah.
And you still do that,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I'm wondering what this wood is. On this barn we're in. I don't think it's chestnut. I'm pretty sure it's oak. But, just the stories that wood tells.
Yeah.
Is, yeah.
It's true. I mean, that's I think living in Macon County now for 3 years this week, or 3 years next week, there are more people that have helped me appreciate that every single thing you look at has a whole story. Mm-hmm. The wood in a barn,
right?
Some abandoned wheelbarrow, everything. And so they've helped me appreciate life because life is slow enough there, as I'm assuming it is here. Yeah. In most places you've lived, to actually ask those questions. I wonder where that wood is from. Yeah. What kind is it? And I'm still not, I'm not a botanist, or I don't even consider myself a naturalist. I don't know a lot of things, but I'm a lot more curious about them now. And I'm willing to be a novice for the first time in my life, I think, That's constantly. Good. Because even you just like looking at that, a lot of people are like that around me. Yeah. You would be friends with a lot of them, So it's cool and I think that comes through in your writing for sure.
Thank you.
Now, speaking of a good poem, can we do the Briar's Last Days?
Sure.
And can you give the backstory for who this is for?
So sure, and actually I brought one of the books that I was ready to share is The Mountains Have Come Closer, which is by Jim Wayne Miller, which is out of print. So the Briar Sermons is the book that's in print that actually, do you know these two? Do you know?
So the reason I asked you to read The Briar's Last Days and bring Jim Wayne Miller into the fold is because with my last podcast, I interviewed a young documentary filmmaker in Pikeville, Elin Justice. And the beginning of that interview is her reading part of the Briar Sermon. Oh. And one that has really stuck with her as a child of Appalachia and Eastern Kentucky. And I'd never read Jim Wayne Miller until Elin introduced me. And then I actually gave The Mountains Have Come Closer as a gift for Charles Baxter up in Minneapolis a couple months ago. Oh, wow. So Jim Wayne Miller is like a part of this project now.
That's good.
So it's cool to see these books here because, and I knew you loved him. Right. But like, of course you would. But anyway. Yeah.
And I didn't know, I mean, so just back a little to my story. So we came to Southwest Virginia so I could go back to grad school at Radford or go back to school. And that began my introduction to the whole field of Appalachia and Appalachian studies. And this terrain is very, very similar to where I grew up. Yeah. And I'm sure Minick's and Schumann's and Burke's and Robertson's traveled down this path and kept going. So to find Jim Wayne Miller was a great, he was one of the first, this is one of the first books that I read as a grad student here, and that really shaped me. And then, so when he died, I wrote this poem.
And what year was this?
Yeah, he'd probably 96.
Yeah, I think this was in a journal in '97 when I read it.
Okay.
Like I found it online.
Oh,
somewhere.
wow, you found it online.
It was like one of those academic websites that you can still get some access to.
All right. So the poem's called The Briar's Last Days for Jim Wayne Miller. In his last days, the briar sleeps in fits like an achy child dreaming of floodwater washing his grandfather away. He stares past the TV news and daydreams seasons his memory can hold. Driving the plow behind his mules, the point whispering into the earth. A summer porch with grandparents, the corn all hoed, beans all strung. A speckled trout, a deep pool, and a campfire bright. Sometimes his memory clouds like a muddy spring, so he just listens to his breath, each gasp, a snag in his throat like a cross-cut saw on a locust knot. He knows the cancer grows, an oak gall on his lung, and he knows these dreams must keep him awake.
I love it. I think this is just a good chance to, let's just go straight into the books on the bed. And even though these were in the extra pile, let's just start with why Jim Wayne Miller was so important to you and what you love about his work.
So that poem kind of digs up all these different references in his poems, and just thinking about so that book was one of the first books that I thought about the poem of the book. So how it's the first book of poetry that I probably read where I thought of how the book was put together. So I learned so much about that from that book, but also just how, it's a great book in terms of both the poetry, but also the kind of the message of the kind of the main poem of the whole book is the Briar Sermon, and you must be born again and again and again. It's just a fun, it takes on this. The character in this poem is a preacher, and he's preaching, revival kind of style in the corner of a street, and it's you can't leave your roots. You can't lose if you do, you lose who you are, and it's fitting that we're in a barn, and he's so yeah.
I remember Elin reading that the first time and just thinking about her life, like. The struggle of, do I leave Pikeville? Do I come home?
Yeah.
And when he says, you're out in the cold, buddy.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's, you don't got to think ridge to ridge.
Right.
Like, your ancestors did, but you can't leave it behind. You never can. Not truly. You can try.
Right.
It's just going to cause that tension. You can't reject it. It's who you are. So yeah, I'm really glad you brought this, because another one of those beautiful gifts that I've been given because people talk about these authors,
right,
and they mean so much to them, and I'm like, well, I got to see what that's about. So yeah, right. I read Jim Wayne Miller for the first time a few years ago, and not surprised that this is in one of your stacks.
Right.
So sure. let's start with, or let's go to the main stack of 6 books on the bed, and then we'll see what else we can get to in the other one. See some Ron Rash here. Anyway, so you can start with whatever you'd like.
All right. So, The Meadow by James Galvin. Have you ever?
I have no idea.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Isn't that exciting?
Is it the best? In fact, it's so great. I would say 90% of the books I haven't read so far across all the interviews.
Wow.
So, yes, tell me all about Galvin.
So, he is mainly a poet, and I wish I've met him. I've never met him. And The Meadow, I thought for the longest time was fiction, but it's actually nonfiction, and it's nonfiction based on where about this place. Okay, so The Meadow is this huge farm ranch on the Wyoming-Colorado border, I think.
Oh.
And it's so hard to describe this book, but it's so beautiful at the sentence level, but also at all the other levels, because he plays so much both with language, but also with form. so there's all these different braids of storylines, and so kind of for me, one of the ways to think about this book is that it's not so much about the when, because all of the different times get all mixed up, and so
that's
there's
my favorite.
and so these vignettes keep adding up. I was gonna try to select something to.
Oh, please do. I love when people take passages.
So there's just so many different time, as well as place referenced. I taught this book twice, and the first time was total bomb, just because it was just so different that students couldn't access. And then the second time I figured out how to kind of preview it. So it's all about this place and all these families that lived there over the years. And where do I start? So they're all brief little chapters.
Okay.
And from different time periods. And so one of the main characters is Lyle. He's an older man, and I'll just see how far this goes. I know I want to read the last. Yeah. So in 1949, Lyle's brother Bob had a hard time with horses. Mowing hay, they spooked a jackrabbit and took out about 100 feet of fence. Bob was pretty thoroughly sanded down, not hurt bad any place, but hurt not bad every place. That same fall, he and Lyle were skidding out saw logs when the horses bolted and dragged Bob by the reins on a whirlwind toward the forest floor. He broke a rib. That's why Lyle went to tractors, though any time you were round turning gears and sickle bars, you have to count your fingers pretty regularly. You have to pay attention. I don't have enough fingers to count the fellows I know who have lost some of theirs, mostly either from farm machinery or roping. Almost anything Lyle did was hazardous, and after his brothers were gone, he mostly worked alone, felling trees with chainsaws, balancing on the top log of a barn, hewing with an axe so sharp that a couple fingers or toes wouldn't even slow it down, or just out fencing. Old wire can snap under the stretcher and come at you like a snake, or lay open the side of your face like a stiletto. Just last week, so that's the first paragraph, there's two more. It's all building to this. Just last week, two kids were stringing fence on a ranch not far from here. They were working on a side hill. They had 100 yards or so of wire laid out on the ground, 4 strands. They were pulling the wire out of a spool mounted on the pickup bed. The wire lazed on the ground in loose spirals. The truck was parked, but it jumped out of gear and started rolling, gathering barbed wire into a raging snarl under the wheels and axles. Only one kid saw it. He tried to jump into the cab to step on the brakes and save the truck from auguring into the ditch at the bottom of the hill. Here's what his friend saw. One pant leg got snagged by the wire before the boy could get the door open. He was running alongside, and then he was pulled underneath into the gathering, snapping rage of wire. The truck raised a little puff of dirt at the bottom of the ravine. There was nothing left of that kid bigger than a finger. Last paragraph. Lyle learned to pay attention, to think things through and not get ahead of himself, not to lapse into inattention ever. After a while, he couldn't not pay attention, shaking a stranger's hand, tasting Mrs. So-and-so's pickles, setting fence posts. It endowed all his actions with precision. It gave him total recall. It obliterated time.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that.
And so that obliteration of time is finally how I figured out what he was doing with all the book structure.
Oh, my gosh. What a revelation to have.
Yeah.
The obliteration of time.
Yep, is how you pay attention.
Wow. I'm not surprised that you love this book.
Yeah.
Even just from reading that. Yeah, what an interesting way to do it. So he's weaving these stories together all in one place.
Yeah, the place, yeah. This meadow is where all these strands happen. And yeah, I mean, even the meadow is kind of in the shape of the infinity sign.
Ooh.
Like there's big
flat
areas of grass with a canal of trees in the middle that looks like the infinity sign. It's just
Weird.
fascinating.
So you'd say the book that's kind of the
it's about the place
and how a place
shapes the people.
Yeah. Wow, I have to read that. And now that you're saying it, you might have pointed this out in City Lights months ago.
Oh,
I think we had a copy.
Sure.
Someone mentioned this book, and I can't remember if it's because we had it or someone said, "Oh, you should get it."
Yeah.
But as you were, I was looking at the cover. I was like, "I've seen this before. I just haven't read it."
Yeah.
So now I'm like, "Wow, all right."
David Joy loves it too. So.
Well, then
it's
it's probably good. Jim Minick and David Joy love it. It's good writing.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I love that one. Let's do the next one.
Do you know this one? I'm You Forever. I'm One of You Forever.
I am embarrassed to say
Fred
I've
Chappell.
never read any of Fred Chappell.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well,
none.
All right.
So introduce me.
So this is Fred Chappell. Just died a year or two ago. Yeah. He was part of the UNC-Greensboro MFA program, one of the first faculty on it. He grew up in the mountains of North Carolina. He was poet laureate of North Carolina for years and years, and extremely accomplished as well as generous with his brilliance, in his time. I never had him as a teacher directly, but I did get to work with him some.
That's cool.
That's
special.
Yeah. And he's influenced me in other ways. Like I'll never be able to accomplish this, but he wrote 4 novels and 4 books of poetry, all with each one focused on a different element.
I remember reading about that.
I just love that. And I'll never write 4 novels and 4 books of poetry. So I've written 1 book about each of those, or 2 or 3 of those.
Yeah. That's cool.
So I Am One of You Forever is his probably most famous book. Yeah, I would say book overall. It's a novel. It's actually a novel and stories, or I don't know, you could call it story cycle. But it's just so beautiful and funny. God, it's funny and heart-wrenching. And it plays with structure in terms of all of these stories circle the center story, which is it deals with a death. There's magic realism in it that kind of, just having this book gave me kind of freedom to experiment with different things.
So it seems so far the first 2 is like they're really influencing the way you think about writing.
Sure, yes.
Or the many ways that you can write.
Yep.
This kind of reminds me of what I talked about with Ramika Bingham-Risher, who I told you about Room Swept Home.
Yeah.
I almost got you that book. I actually might send it to you. But she talked about how Lucille Clifton changed the way she saw how you could write about women.
Sure, yeah.
Right? So it's interesting to hear people talk about writers that open doors for their own work just by reading how they write.
Yes.
And so what would you say is really special about this book to you, whether in form and structure, or even just what you really connected with in the stories?
The art of it, the sentence, just even down to the sentence level, the humor, the structure, like the structure of the book is the title, I Am One of You Forever, is the title of the book, but it's also the answer to the question that is the very end of the book. Oh. So the whole book makes a circle. And,
okay.
It's just fascinating what he is able to do. And just, it's a short book.
Are there any passages that could help bring us into that art that you love?
So another thing the book does, it's a coming-of-age story of this 10-year-old boy named Jess, and his mother's a teacher, I think. Yeah, and so each story, not each story, but most of the stories are a different relative coming to visit.
Oh.
And,
okay.
And so there's one who sleeps in his coffin. I think this is one. Uncle Gerton, and has this beard that he always keeps tucked in his bib overalls, and he sleeps in his coffin that he's making
for himself.
And he goes around, and Jess follows him. He goes to visits all these cemeteries to read all the gravestones and get the perfect epitaph. You know, he becomes this very discerning reader of gravestones.
Wow.
It's just so funny.
That is amazing.
And yeah, you know, and he's pretty, you know, oh, there was, you know, gone but not forgotten. And he'll ask Jess, you know these people? You know, he's like, they're forgotten, aren't they? I mean, it's just really funny.
Yeah.
So
this is the story with that uncle?
Yeah, I'll just read the first paragraph.
Yeah.
Just Uncle Girton's beard had a long and complex history, but I will try not to bore us with much of that. Enough to say that it was a fabled beard that went that when my father and I heard that Uncle Girton was coming to visit, we were thrilled at the prospect of viewing the legendary fleece. How long is that beard of his now, my father asked my grandmother. She smiled a secret smile. Oh, I wouldn't have no idea, she said, but he's been growing it for 40 years or more and ain't once yet trimmed it. That's what I hear tell. So...
oh my gosh.
So,
it's funny you mentioning that sleeping in the coffin. It reminds me of when I was with Elaine McMillian Sheldon in Knoxville. So she's a documentary filmmaker from West Virginia. And some of her childhood, I believe, was spent in Southwest Virginia, coal miner family. But she just made a really good documentary called King Coal last year, and I actually met her through Elin, who introduced me to Jim Wayne Miller, so I kind of just followed that strand. But anyway, in our interview for the Story Made podcast, she brought out a book that was a photographer, like, I don't know, maybe 60s, 70s, obscure photographer in West Virginia. He just did like photos by request in the community where he lived, and I'm forgetting where it is exactly right now, but one of them was an old woman who said, "Can you come take a picture of me in my coffin so I know what I'm going to look like when I'm dead?" That's what that's how he did photographs. It's like, you know, whatever people wanted. And so there's this photograph, and she was showing it to me, and I was like, what on earth? But when you said that, I was like, it reminded me of that strange request.
Yeah, for sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Fred Chappell, I am one of you forever.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to read that now.
So I'll read a little of the ending.
Oh, okay.
So they're I don't want to give it away.
I know it's always hard to know what to share.
So there's some dream parts of the book, and the beginning, middle, and end are kind of dream chapters. And so Jess is always wanting to belong. Like, he's the little kid, and most of the other males are, I think they're all adults. And so he's always, and all the uncles are old coming, so he's wanting to be part of it. So they're at a hunting cabin, and they're getting ready to leave. Let's see if I set it up enough. They waited in the car, and I sat there gazing about the cabin. In a few minutes, I heard the sound of boots on the rough porch planking. The door opened, and Johnson Gibbs stood solidly in it. His blue eyes were very bright. There was full sunlight now, and it made a burning glare on the snow. Against this harsh light, Johnson's figure loomed black as velvet, blackly burning, and his voice sounded deep and hollow. Well, Jess, are you one of us or not?
Ooh.
And I am one of you forever. And Johnson Gibbs is one of the central characters who died. So, he's speaking from the grave there.
Wow.
And, yeah.
Man, I love that, going to graves and looking at different headstones. I feel like I was reading about that somewhere. I get some of my stories mixed up that I read on top of each other, but it was like someone spending time trying to find what their grave is going to look like.
Oh, wow.
As a way to distract from dying, like instead of paying attention to,
that's fun.
The mortality, you're just trying to make your gravestone pretty. Anyway, I've always found that interesting, but I like going to cemeteries.
Sure. Yeah.
I know I told you I was at Otterbein,
but
ironically, 2 days before that, and this is just how life goes, but it was a cemetery week. I was in Massachusetts, and Eliza Edens, who grew up in Williamstown, that gave us all these recommendations in the Berkshires, she wrote a song called West Lawn Cemetery. It's my favorite song she's ever written I pretty much loved every song she's ever written, but there's something about it. It's just so piercing, so hauntingly beautiful. And it's about a cemetery in Williamstown, close to where she grew up, that she used to walk around. And I went to it. And I took a picture of it and I sent it to her. And it was really interesting to be there. I mean, it's old. It's Massachusetts, These are old graves.
Sure.
And me and my friend Zach, every trip we take, like we went to the Princeton Cemetery and spent like an hour the first time we were there. But there's something really cool about it.
Yeah.
I just see, who's here?
Right.
In Greenville, I found like the Furman family of Furman University.
Sure.
There's a really old cemetery there. So anyway, I like anything related to graves, cemeteries, coffins.
Did a bird just fly in?
Oh, did it?
Or did it come?
I hope it does.
I think I just saw the silhouette. I'm surprised there's not swallows around, but there's not animals.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
Anyway, okay, that's great. What's the next one?
Turn Me Loose by Frank X. Walker. Do you know?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Love me some Frank X.
I love all of Frank's work. He's a good friend and writer. And I chose this out of all of his books for several reasons. I just think it's his most well put together and original. So it's called Turn Me Loose, and the subtitle is The Unghosting of Medgar Evers. And it's all about the civil rights lawyer activist who was assassinated in 68 maybe. So Frank X, has done so much persona kind of poems over his whole career. He took on the point of view of York, the Buffalo Dance, I think was one of the books. So I love this one because he captures Medgar Evers without, the only words he uses for Medgar Evers is the title. That's Turn Me Loose. That's the only words from the assassinated that he uses. But the rest of the book is from all these different points of views, including Myrlie Evers, Medgar's widow, and Byron Della Beckwith, who was the assassin, as well as the assassin's wife. And I'll read one that's from the point of view of the bullet.
Oh, that's a good one.
So, and it just the whole idea of a black man writing from the point of view of a white KKK assassin, that just is so powerful. And then to be able to do it well, I think it's a great gift and model, and just opens up so much of the world to be able to do that. So, so this is the one at point of view of the bullets. 1/3 of 180 grams of lead. Both of them were history, even before one pulled the trigger, before I rocketed through the smoking barrel hidden in the honeysuckle, before I tore through before a man's back, shattered his family, a window, tore through an inner wall, before I bounced off a refrigerator and a coffee pot, before I landed at my destined point in history next to a watermelon. What was cruel was the irony, not the melon, not the man falling in slow motion, but the man squinting through the crosshairs, reducing the justice system to a small circle, praying that he not miss, then sending me to deliver a message, as if the woman screaming in the dark or the children crying at her feet could ever believe a bullet was small enough to hate.
Wow. Yeah, that's such a good one. Yeah. I'm glad you brought Frank into.
Yeah.
I think he's another one of those writers that I wouldn't have found out about had I not moved to Appalachia.
Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah.
I had never heard of Frank X. Walker till I went to City Lights, actually. And I forget if it was Chris or Ian. Somebody recommended his poems, and it's just such a vital part of the writing legacy in Appalachia. And this is a book that is really powerful. So I'm glad you brought it out. And there's a Welty thread there because of the story she wrote.
Oh, tell me.
Coming from the perspective of the killer. Have you ever read that?
No, I don't know that.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'll send it to you.
yeah.
But she did something as obviously a white woman,
Right.
but this takes it to another level
Wow.
because of Frank X being
Right.
a black writer.
Wow.
And I like that language. If it opens up possibilities, it's a gift
Right.
to have these perspectives.
Right.
When you think about Frank X, you've known him for
Right.
quite some time. What makes him a special writer?
His talent and humor and heart. He's done a whole lot to help a lot of other writers with, just being a good teacher, mentor, and just his creative voice, his insight. He's just a lot of fun to be around and to try to figure out how he sees the world. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned this book being his most original. Is what you're saying, or
I don't know that I want to say original, but it's the one I like the best.
Okay.
Because I think he achieves the most with, he shoots the highest, and I think he achieves the most with that.
trying to I guess I haven't thought about what Frank X is known for the most in terms of his books, because again, I've not spent a lot of years reading him. I kind of just started with what we had in store. But would you say this book is maybe undervalued, or do you think it's other people have it as their best too of his?
I would guess his most well-known one is his first one, which is Appalachia.
Yeah, which is very, very good.
Right. Yeah, and then he kept. He's done other collections, but he's also done several that were in different point of views, like York. Do you know who York was?
I do, but can you explain?
Okay, so on Lewis and Clark's big expedition, there was one black man, and that was York, and he was Lewis's slave, and so Frank did 2 books from his point of view, or focused on him. Not all the poems are from his point of view. Those were terrific too.
Yeah,
just the whole. He might have been the first black man to vote in this country, and the first black man to carry a rifle freely.
Which is wild to think about. I love how so many Appalachian writers have helped me find parts of history that I wouldn't have known about, even poets.
Right.
That's what's really cool about, and I'm not saying it's just Appalachian writers, but because I spend so much time reading Appalachian writers, it's there's so much to learn even beyond the poems.
Right.
Because of the references that are made. And, just with your books alone, your novel, you could just sit here and be like, okay, well, what was immigration like back in Pennsylvania? And why did these communities form? But And that's what makes cool writing, is it makes you even more curious about what's going on. But I think, Frank X with that York perspective, it's how many people know that? So there's even a benefit beyond the work, is that people can say, okay, well, let's keep going with it. And I think that's what makes writing even more powerful, is what other questions do the words that you read beget. And I think Frank does that a lot.
Yeah.
So, let's go to the next one.
So this is a cheat. This is the Harper's American Literature Anthology.
Look at that. How old is that? When did you get that book?
It's a good question what the copyright is. So I taught out of this for probably at least 20 years.
Wow. That has worked. That has seen life.
Yeah, I don't see the...
That has been taught from,
1999.
Sure. Wow.
Maybe.
Yeah, it looks... That's like some stuff you'd find in an old
1999
bookstore, and I'm
sure.
Yep, I'm going to buy that because look how worn it is.
Sure.
Is this a syllabus?
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. There's old.
Man, I might have you send me your syllabi
so it was a fun class.
So I can look at what you've taught and read that stuff.
It was it was a 1-semester course, and it was impossible to teach it, chronologically, to get all American literature in 14 weeks. So I just did it thematically, and I did it community, identity, and the American dream. And so I organized.
I love that thing.
Everything. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and so this book has favorite passages of Thoreau and favorite Emily Dickinson. And
Yep.
Bartleby by Melville. And so, you know, but the reason I brought it was it has Willa Cather's neighbor Rosicky.
Yes.
So,
yes. And I want people to know for context that
Sure.
before we even met, you and I emailed about Willa Cather and Eudora Welty. And that's when I knew that this would happen, this meeting.
Okay.
Because I'm like, come on, we got to be friends now. So I'm so glad that you brought this into the fold because, you know, once you meet a Catherian spirit,
Sure.
you're always going to be buds. So
Yeah.
awesome.
And this, you know, I have other versions of this story. Like I have her collected short stories that it's in.
Yeah.
But I don't know why, but this version's a different one. So it's the one I've read every year for 20 years, at least twice a year, probably. So I like this version better. And I like I always try to get it in the middle of the semester because there's a lot of dark American literature, right? And this is, I mean, the main character dies, but it's still a pretty positive story. And so it was refreshing for both me and the students, I think. And it's just kind of a sweet story, and yet it's very deep in how it gets that sweetness. So,
can you tell people a little bit about what happens in the story? I know it's hard to, you don't want to give things away, but it's like to draw people in because we got to get more Cather folks out.
Sure. So Anton Rosicky, how do you say it? I've never been sure. Rosicky, I think.
I just say it in my head how I want. And
yeah.
That's what it is.
Grew up very poor Czech and so poor that he had to beg for food. And in the begging, and this was in his, you know, city in Czechoslovakia, and some richer people that he was begging from heard his accent and said, "I'll help you." And eventually, he made it to America and had a good life as a tailor for a little while as a young man in New York City. But then he got tired, realized that there was more that he wanted to do, and then he traveled to Nebraska and started farming. But it's just, you know, that's kind of the background. But it's about what kind of a good person he was and how he wanted that for his children, and then so I didn't know that the woman, the wife, I forget her name in the book, but she was a model for. Did you know this? She was a model for My Antonia. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Till last summer. It's like, oh God.
See, I love the worlds of these writers.
Yeah,
how like one things connect to the others. Yeah.
Have you been to Red Cloud?
No. And so this is. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make it work, but most people don't know this about me. Well, they do if we've talked about Willa Cather because I talk a lot. I give a lot of context. Like, I grew up for over a year when I was really young, like maybe 4 years old. My brother's in kindergarten. But we moved to rural Nebraska from Ohio for a very brief stint.
Wow.
Albeit very powerful because it was the first time in my life that I'd lived in rural America. And the last time until I moved to Franklin, North Carolina. But we were in Seward, which was 40 miles, I think 30 miles west of Lincoln.
Okay.
And I just always have believed that I found my way to Willa. And it kind of like brought me back to what's beautiful about Nebraska. I mean, it was so empty. And when she writes about those fire red sunsets, unimpeded, sinking into the land, it's like you don't get that in Appalachia.
No.
You don't get that in most places, not even Minnesota. I mean, Nebraska has so much beauty.
Right.
And I think finding Willa and capturing the spirit of Nebraska, it's like it was meant to be. But I've been trying to think, okay, how can I get to Red Cloud? I'm driving to New Mexico, and it would be quite a detour.
Right.
To get up there, but like I have to do it because she's one of my favorite writers ever. And I actually drove by Winchester. Yeah. But because I'd already made a detour to your hometown in Newburgh, I was like, I can't also go there.
Yeah.
So at some point I got to visit the birthplace and Red Cloud, her childhood. But yes, I mean, I did learn about that a few years ago, the connection with My Antonia.
So last summer I did the tornado book tour in Kansas primarily, but I wanted I have a friend who lives in Kearney, Nebraska, and I really wanted to go to Red Cloud.
Yeah.
So we spent some time in Nebraska and spent a day. I read at the little Red Cloud Library. It was just, I don't know.
That is so cool.
10 people, it was fun. But
how awesome, though.
Right,
in the land
yeah.
of Cather, you
Right.
get to read.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
man. What a special trip.
Yeah. And what a foundation. Somewhere I read that, that's one of the most established author foundation preservation kind of stuff in the world.
They do some
maybe.
amazing stuff. For a pretty obscure place in Nebraska, that's a powerhouse organization. So shouts out to the Willa Cather Foundation and everything they do to keep her spirit alive and her work. And they have the prairie there too. The Memorial Prairie, or I don't know what they call it, but I've always wanted to. I need to get there. Gosh, this is inspiring me. I might just say screw it and go all the way north on my way back from.
There you
Mexico.
go. So the highlight of that. There was a lot that we got to see, but the highlight was, I don't know how many miles north of town, at least 5, probably more, is the farm that is based for both My Antonia and neighbor Rosicky. And
wow.
And they own it, and it was totally, the house is locked, but it was, you could, it was, nobody was there, and we ate our picnic supper there. We were on our way to Kearney, Nebraska, and we had our evening picnic there.
I'm so jealous.
And the root cellar. Do you remember the root cellar in My Antonia?
Yes. So how could I forget?
It is there, preserved. You can go down in.
Man, so you got to actually see the story, just like we were talking about with the Blueberry Farm.
Sure.
You got to be there.
Yeah.
Oh, how cool!
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a great story to teach too.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of the American lit is urban, so it was nice to have some rural as well.
I think that's what Cather does, because she lived pretty urban life too, for much of her life,
right,
in Pittsburgh, New York, but
right
between Nebraska and the Southwest,
those were her.
Those were the visions for her stories, and I'm going back to Taos for the first time since 2021, but she's the reason I went to Taos in the first place. Because in Death Comes for the Archbishop, talk about these missionaries going down there, they're riding on that road from Santa Fe to Taos. I needed to see the view. I needed to come into Taos, look at the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in the background. And that's how vivid and powerful Willa Cather writes about these landscapes, but she's best when she's writing about rural landscapes. There's no doubt about it. And she captures Nebraska to a T.
Right.
You can't get a better ambassador for the state than, not that all of her stories are happy, but they are beautiful.
Right.
And she helps you realize that kind of, I think a theme with you is paying attention, listening.
Right.
What can we learn from bears and birds and how to know trees? I think a lot of her stories make you want to do that too.
Sure.
The very fine, particular things in life that are so easy to miss. What is the line in My Antonia, or it's like a pumpkin that lay under the sun, and I didn't wish to be anything else. I live a lot of my life based on that concept of something entire. To dissolve into something complete and great. Because if you just appreciate this gorgeous, gigantic, beautiful world in its particulars and the fine things that are right in front of you, you're going to feel so much more a part of it. I know we're going on and on about Willa, but gosh, I love her. And I'm so jealous you got to be there and do a picnic. Come on, man. Oh, gosh. Well, that's so the American literature. How did students respond to Willa Cather? I'm really curious.
I think pretty well. It's a long, short story, so I was always worried about that and if they would read it all. But I think they did. Yeah, they. There's a line in the book, in the story, something like maybe Rosicky learned or said maybe you can't, or the doctor I think was saying maybe Rosicky showed how you can't I forget. You can't put your life in a bank, or I'm butchering it.
Do you want to find it?
No. I couldn't find it fast enough.
Okay, so this one's awesome because I just saw Charles at the Cowie School down in Franklin.
Oh, really? I've never met him.
He did a talk with Brent Martin and Annette Sonu-Clapsaddle.
Yeah, okay.
So
I did see that.
It was at the William Bartram Conference.
Oh, wow.
Bartram Trail Conference.
All
so,
right.
yeah. Charles Frazier.
Wow.
Cold Mountain.
I would love to meet him sometime. But,
well, if you ever come up or come down our way, we'll try to arrange it,
Okay.
It was, yeah.
I thought he was in the middle part of the state.
Asheville.
Is he in Asheville? Okay. Okay. So, yeah.
And he grew up in Franklin. Did you know that? Like where I live?
No.
At least partly he grew up in Andrews and Franklin. And so
I would have guessed Western, but no, I didn't know specifics.
he was, when I met him at that event, I saw him read at Lemuria Books a few years ago in Jackson when I was there. Yeah. But then I actually met him, and he was talking about how he and his friend used to farm, even though they were like city boys in Franklin, because he didn't want some dumb job like grocery bagging or whatever. He wanted to be outside, the adventure, the hard work. And so he and his friend used to work on a farm not too far from the Cowie School where we were. And so he was just talking about he and his friend and, how they would work the farms and yada, yada, his childhood in Franklin. And then all of a sudden, Kathy, who works at the Cowie School, comes in, says hi to Charles, and it's like, hey, I went to school with you, but I was much younger. Her family had bought his best friend's house. Wow. Like all those years later. And so it was like one of those small town Appalachian moments, but I love Charles Frazier.
Good.
And let's talk about Cold Mountain.
So I love Cold Mountain. I don't like this cover. It's got the actress. The movie release version. But I love how it captures the place, but I also love how it kind of has it does have two stories going on. The male's journey from where he escapes from a Civil War hospital, Confederate hospital. He's walking back to the mountains. So that linear journey versus the female kind of circular sense of place in the mountains and trying to figure out how to live there. And I love how those go back and forth and kind of balance each other and then join at the end.
Did you relate to that at all? Those journeys?
Some, but I was more thinking about it in terms of writing the novel, Fire As You Water. I wanted the same kind of. I didn't do those physical kind of journeys, but I was interested to see how the male and the female energies would. I really studied what he did to try to display and make my own work even closer, stronger. So and his language is just gorgeous too. So that's really great. With Fire As Your Water, were you thinking of it in terms of the circular journey with Ada? Did you see it that way, or how did Charles writing in Cold Mountain play into how you eventually wrote this story? Yeah, I didn't. I don't think there's the linear versus the circle, but there's definitely the male female, and I knew I would, like in Fire As Your Water, I knew, I'm not a Christian, so for me, I very much was raised in the church and thought I was going to be a preacher, but I wanted, and so the main character, Ada, is a faith healer, and it's very much based in religion, her belief in her church. And so I needed a balance to that. So that's why Will, the other main character, is an agnostic. Yeah. And why Cicero has this kind of very different and distant from a religion point of view. The journeys were very different, but I did want to try to learn what I could from Frazier for the male-female. Yeah, and the meeting of those lives. Yeah. Which was really interesting. And I wanted to ask you about this at some point, because after reading Fire As Your Water and The Blueberry Years, I always get curious, because I'm not religious. I was a Catholic school kid for 11 years. Then just have never
participated in church since then, but I love reading about religion. I love religion and stories. And so when I thought about not only the Will and Ada sort of tension with that religion, but also you write about loneliness in your poems and in the Blueberry Years, and how, you're moving to this new place. And one of the ways you tried to find community is you went to a lot of churches in Floyd County. And wasn't one of them Quaker?
Yeah.
And, you really just tried all these different ways, but we're still struggling to find that place that you really felt like you belonged. So it was so, I was curious, are you really religious, or was that just an attempt at community? And tell me about your exploration of religion, especially in those years where you were trying to find a community and just didn't.
Yeah, we still struggle with that. When you want to belong to a community, and yet the basic beliefs of the community you can't buy into, it's like you never belong kind of thing. So that contradiction is always...
So did you go to those churches, though, because you were raised in the church and you thought, just that would be a good place to start?
Yeah. Even, there was a Mennonite church just half a mile from the Blueberry Farm that, I knew going there that I would never join. I was pretty strong. I didn't know fully, but I was pretty sure I would never join. But they were very welcoming, and I didn't like that the women couldn't speak or vote. It was very patriot. And I've learned a lot more that there's a lot of different Mennonite, there's some very liberal Mennonite strands. Charles Wright says he's a God-fearing agnostic, and I think that I like that phrase.
For yourself too.
Yeah.
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 Because I always find it interesting when non-religious people write about religion so well. But if you were thinking about becoming a preacher, then of course you were pondering religion quite a bit as a young fellow.
Right.
Wow, can you imagine how your life would have been different if you become a preacher?
Yeah. No. When I realized, in college, when I finally started to really think about it, I was like, no, I can't go that route.
What faith religion were you raised in?
Methodist. Yeah.
Okay. Every week church going type of family.
Oh yeah, we lived right beside the church. So yeah.
So you know the deal.
Yeah, sure.
Just didn't end up that way for you.
Right.
I just was curious about that, because you do write a lot about churches and religion and plays in. But I can see the parallels to the male-female journey in here, so I'm glad you brought that in. So what about the last one of the six? Oh, that's a good one.
Birds of Opulence by Crystal Wilkinson. Several of these writers are also poets, the prose writers that I'm pulling out. So I love their conciseness and use of imagery and their sentence, just the sentence level. But I also love this book for its structure. It's very similar to I Am One of You Forever in terms of this. It's a nest. The whole thing kind of circles the center happening. So I was very much love how she pulls that off, and yeah.
You friends with Crystal as well?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool that you bring in these folks that I love the writing community in Appalachia.
Sure.
It's very aspirational, I feel like, to find these people, and because you all have so much respect for each other, and all come from such different backgrounds and communities, and yet there's just this synergy between you. Can you explain a little bit more about the content of this book for people that might be wondering, okay, well, what is this nest and what's around it? You don't got to go further than you need to, but I found this interesting.
Yeah.
The comparison between
the
birds that have
the covers.
Yeah, the covers and something going in their beaks.
Oh, yeah. You
see that?
Yeah.
You got the O and your. And
the bird, I don't know. Yeah.
I'll take a picture of that.
Her husband's an artist. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he
did that cover?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's a beautiful cover.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Shouts out Crystal.
Yeah.
Wilkinson. Just a top-notch Appalachian writer. Also going to the Mississippi Book Festival this year.
Her newest book is just shot to the top.
I know. I was like, wow.
Great. It's great.
It's well deserved.
So, right.
I actually saw her recently in Elin, who introduced me to Jim Wayne Miller.
I need to meet
did a
her.
documentary about bell hooks.
Oh, wow.
And because she works for Kentucky Education Television. Is that what it is? But her and another producer did this story. They interviewed Crystal. They interviewed Silas House.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say Silas.
Oh my gosh, why am I blanking on the feminist activist in New York that she was really good friends with? Gloria Steinem.
Oh, wow.
I went out to see her. So, yeah, I'll try to send you that link.
Yeah.
Because I think it's through their maybe PBS that you can write it. But I just think Crystal's a wonderful writer. And again, another person I hope to meet someday. But I'm glad you brought that in, not only for birds, but another good Appalachian writer.
Sure.
So
can we go?
We did 6, but whatever you want to say about these, because I see Rash, I see Wilma Dykeman.
Right.
We can't not include Wilma.
All right.
Because she's a legend and deserves way more respect and notoriety than she gets.
I agree. So I'm going to jump to Gurney Norman's Divine Rights Trip. Do you know this one?
Well, I haven't read it. I'm glad you're bringing in Gurney because Mandy did.
Right.
At Red Spotted Newt.
Yeah.
This is the second person to do it.
Okay.
And I feel like we just need to continue to pump up Gurney's work.
Sure. So Divine Right is a character, and it's kind of, originally this was published in the Horace catalog in 70s.
Oh, wow.
And that was like a big, have you ever seen
Yeah.
It's like a big magazine kind of book and the novel was in the margins almost.
That's so weird.
And it's just so counterculture.
Yeah, I love it though.
And so Divine Right lives in California, but he's from Kentucky, and and it's in the hippie 60s, and he realizes that he would be much better off at home. So he gets in his van, the VW van named Urge, and it's about his trip back home. And then in Kentucky, he buys or somehow finds a piece of stripped land and starts reclaiming it and farming it. So it's kind of like the counter, go west. It's the opposite of that. Go east and root yourself back in your home.
I love that.
Yeah, and Gurney has been such a Robert Gipe and I call him Uncle G. He's been such a great father figure for somebody. I mean, without him, we would not have Frank X. Well, we probably would, but Gurney very much nurtured and published Frank's first book, and Gurney's wife Nyoka Hawkins. They created a press just so that they could finally get Frank's first book out, and he's very much nurtured Crystal. And so many other writers, too. So
what I've gathered about Gurney in the time I've spent driving around Appalachia is just how it is, all incalculable.
Right.
The reach that his influence has had and his encouragement, and that he does it so quietly and so naturally and so frequently that, you could throw a stone, find a writer that has been supported by Gurney Norman. And I love those people who so don't want a writing community to be exclusive, who don't care about, is this person better than me? Could they take my mantle? It's like, no, let's bring everybody into the fold that has a voice. Yeah. And the same thing happened with Mandy. She's coming out with a book soon.
Right.
And she started writing because Gurney Norman asked her to send him what she had. Can you imagine how terrifying that is?
Yeah.
Did you ever have a moment like when did you meet Gurney? I'm curious about.
He used to be the kind of the visiting or the writer in residence at Heinemann.
Yeah.
That's where I got to know him best. I might have met him before that at App Studies conference, and
so many relationships form at Heinemann.
Yeah.
So you met him there. Was this? How long ago do you think it was?
Actually, I probably met him at App Studies first, and that would have been in the early 90s.
Wow.
And then I started going to Hyman in 98. So
very cool.
So here's kind of a side note. So when I was at Radford, I'd brought in a lot of writers, and I brought Frank a couple of times, Crystal too. But I think the first time I brought Frank, Gurney did all these PBS. I don't know if you might not know this. He did a bunch of PBS pieces about rivers.
No.
For Kentucky. Yeah,
I have to find that.
They're great. Yeah. And he said, "Oh, you got to go to Mary Draper's Angles and the New River." And so because, so Mary Draper Angles was, we would say kidnapped, but Shawnee came in the 1750s, I think, in the Radford area, Blacksburg area, and killed her family and took her all the way into Ohio. And then she escaped and followed the New River back to this area.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's a powerful story. Yeah. And then her descendants had a ferry before 81, before Route 11, a ferry across the New River right at Radford. And there's still a tavern, Ingalls Tavern. And there's still this log building that's in good shape. The family's taking care of it, that I'd never known of. And because of Gurney and having a guest Frank there, we were able to make connections with the family and go visit. So just fun. Yeah.
Gosh, I need to go see that. That sounds, what a story.
Yeah.
Gosh, Gurney Norman, Uncle G.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah,
good stuff. Another.
So
legend.
Ron Rash is I mean, I met him when his first book came out. Yeah, cool. So he's been kind of a model for years and years, and a friend. He did a very nice blurb for the Blueberry book. And I love his poetry, I think, the most. Or his short stories. I know he loves his short stories the most. And I almost pulled Burning Bright. But I love his poetry.
And that's an arc of this book?
What's that?
Advanced reading copy?
Oh, yeah, you're right.
That's cool.
I wrote a review for it.
That's amazing. So this is Waking.
Right, Waking by Ron Rash, yeah.
Yeah, I was just reading, I went back and read Saints at the River.
Yeah.
And I feel like that one had not been recommended to me by anybody, but it's kind of timely because it was the 50th anniversary of the Chattooga River being designated a wild and scenic river.
Oh, wow.
And I was reading that book not weeks after, being with Doug Woodward and John Lane. We did a river cleanup, and then they came and talked about, because Doug Woodward was on one of the guides for the raft trip with Jimmy Carter and his wife to start to sell the legislation. And so we were there celebrating that, and then I went and I read Saints at the River, and I was like, wow, yeah, this is a really poignant story of what's still going on. We're in a lot of places across the country, but right now with us, there's a big floodplain meeting yesterday so that developers don't completely obliterate our land in Macon County. But like just being on the Chattooga and realizing, we got to protect that thing. Yeah. It's an interesting story. And that struggle between someone who moved away and has those haunting feelings about their home, but has to come be the photographer for this whole event, for the news story. So it's like, I don't know. I thought that was interesting. I'd never read that one before. But yeah, Ron's a really good writer. Good person too.
Yep, for sure.
And now we got Wilma.
Right.
Speaking of rivers.
Right. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Wilma Dykeman, The French Broad, which, what year did it come out? I would like to know that.
That's an old book too. Like, look at that.
1955. So this might be a first edition, huh?
Oh my gosh, the stained sides, you know what I mean? Like on the pages, like that is.
So this is nonfiction, and it's about the French Broad River, and I just love, it's been probably decades since I've read it. I love how she blends in natural history with cultural history, with just the beauty of the landscape description. And it's just an incredible. I wish every river had a book like this to celebrate it. Yeah. And then the other interesting, I think I remember hearing that this was part of American River series that a publisher wanted to put out, and she put in a section about the pollution. And they wanted to cut it, and she refused, and so they included it. Mama. So and I met her a couple times, but I didn't know her real well. But yeah,
So that's so cool.
what a dignified and brilliant person.
I
Yeah.
was just talking with someone else. Glennis Redmond had listened to Wilma Dykeman speak before she passed. And so she keeps coming up. But
Yeah.
it was actually Mae Claxton at Western Carolina
I know Mae,
University
yeah.
who did her dissertation at the University of Georgia and interviewed Eudora Welty
Oh, wow.
in Jackson.
Wow.
So her and I first connected on Eudora, but she was the one who told me I'd never read a thing by Wilma Dykeman. And Mae Claxton's like, if you like Eudora Welty,
Right.
but really just an unsung hero
Right.
of writers, especially women writers in this region
Yeah.
that don't get their due. And, I was reading all these books and to me, it's like the W triumvirate of Wilma, Welty, and Willa. That's how truly they're the standard for me in so many ways.
That's funny.
If I can get everybody to read those three writers, I think we'd have a better world.
Sure.
Better read world for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really cool. I'm glad you brought in Wilma because can't really write about this or talk about this region without
Right.
her stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gosh, I need to
Yeah.
go back to that, but what a great edition.
I do
to
too.
have.
Yeah. I should reread it again.
Yeah. Ooh, who's this?
So,
Birds again?
yeah. Emma Bell Miles. So you don't know.
Never.
Okay.
I've never seen this book, but wow.
So, she, I'm going to
How old
be,
is this?
this was first published, and we might have to do some, they aren't
Some
going to give
digging?
us, yeah.
We can look it up.
I would,
It looks awesome.
so I would say she lived, I think she died in the 19 teens or 20s,
Oh my gosh.
young.
So where's she from?
Chattanooga. Brilliant artist. She did the pencil drawings.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Oh
my gosh.
Her most famous book is, damn it, I knew I was going to forget this. I've read it twice.
We all forget. We read too many books.
And I already checked. There's no internet connection here for me. So anyways,
Neither for me either.
so we need to.
We'll link it.
Mountains. It has mountains in it, and it's a beautiful, kind of like what Wilma Dykeman did for the river. She does for the Chattanooga Mountain area. Kind of a natural cultural history. And sure.
Look at this cover.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
And these sketches.
yeah. She.
Are you serious? Of course you love this. You're
Right,
probably like, yeah, I see these
right.
birds all the time.
She had a real hard life.
Yeah.
She married. She grew up pretty well-to-do, and then she married a man who was pretty poor. And I mean, there's different versions, but he wasn't able to support the family. And I mean, they spent some summers living in a tent and up
Wow.
on the mountains. Just and she had very poor health. She died young.
How sad.
Yeah, but she was published in some of the biggest magazines in New York at the time. So,
Thank you for, I
Yeah.
would have never heard of.
so I mean, so my favorite story from this book is she was sick and spent a lot of time sleeping in this tent in the summer. So the flaps would be open, and she had this big head of hair, and she would lay still enough that a titmouse would come, a titmouse bird, and hop around and pull hair and take it for his. She guessed it was a male. Take it for the nest,
Wow.
and come repeatedly to do that. And then one time the male brought his partner. I'm assuming, and the partner was not having it. She was much more wary. But I
Yeah.
mean, just to have that stillness and patience and to experience that, and then to write about it so well.
Oh man, how fitting.
Yeah.
Yeah. God, I'm going to get that right when I get home. Have Chris try to find me one.
I would hope he would know about it. He would definitely know about her other book that I can't
He
think
would,
of the title
yeah.
of.
Yeah, it sounds like it's up his alley.
And actually, I've learned of her because of one of my main mentors at Radford is Grace Edwards, who created and directed the Appalachian Studies Center there.
Oh.
And she did her dissertation on Emma Bell Miles. So
Yo, can I
So-
say, I know people think I'm crazy for this, but I've read a lot of dissertations.
Yeah.
And it's because, May did Welty, but Ebony Lumumba at Jackson State, their chair of the English department, she did one based on 4 women, the song by Nina Simone, and she chose 4 different authors. Like, I'd never read Lorene Cary, Price of a Child. Unbelievable book. I think the other one that I found through there was Buchi Emecheta, who's another author that she put in there. But anyway, it's like, if you go back to people's dissertations,
Right.
one, you start to realize these are their formational
Right.
authors. Katie McKee down at University of Mississippi at Southern Studies did her dissertation and eventually wrote a book on Sherwood Bonner, who was a woman in Mississippi in the 1800s, Reconstruction, who abandoned her family, her child and husband, and moved to Massachusetts, where she eventually got in with the Transcendentalists. But like, she had this yearning
Wow.
to be somebody as a writer and couldn't get it in the old
Right.
world, South.
Right.
And she eventually moved back and died relatively young. But for that period of time, she
Wow.
was getting published. And anyway, Katie wrote a whole dissertation
Wow.
on it before writing a book. And it's like, you can start to see why they love these writers. But that's
Yeah.
really interesting. I'm glad that you brought this up, because Emma Bell Miles is going to be on my list to get
All right.
right away.
All right. Oh, good.
Do we have a few more that we at least want to
Sure.
at least just say it?
Sure. So, The Unsettling of America, Culture and Agriculture by Wendell Berry. Very formative for me when I was in my 20s. And I guess one of the things to say about, he challenged or said something like, now we are married to our careers more than to our places. And that's one of the reasons I stayed here, even though, I never, for so long at Radford, because I wanted to see what it would be like to be rooted here. So
That's a good point.
yeah.
Honestly, I feel like I'm doing that in Franklin.
Yeah. I
'Cause
hear that.
When I could have left after the whole fiasco at Western,
Yeah.
I had some opportunities. I was looking at things, and something deep inside me was like, do not go. Like, you have to. I want Franklin to be a good place, a good community. I'm committed to it. First time in my life. I've never cared really about anywhere I've lived.
Wow.
I loved Ann Arbor because I was in college,
Sure.
but I don't care about Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
And it's not a place that's salvageable. It's been completely ruined by development and, rich kids
Yeah.
coming in from out of state and like the transients of workers in
College.
higher ed. But
Yeah.
I think I get you there. It's like,
Yeah.
but I think a lot of writers too has made me say, like, you got to commit to something. You got to
Right.
commit to a place, and you don't have to be born there. I don't like that.
Right.
There are plenty of people that care about
Right.
places that aren't born there.
Right.
That is not a requirement. And in
Yeah.
fact, I think a lot of people take it for granted that are born in a place.
Right. Yes, very much.
That may not
Yeah.
see. But for me, I'm like, I really, really hope that more people find that place that they want to root themselves in.
Yeah. So I interviewed Wendell Berry at least 20 years ago.
That's amazing.
And it was published in the Appalachian Journal. And one of my last questions, so I was asking, that's this whole conversation, what does it mean to be Native? And he was very, I think the title of the interview was Be a Native and a Citizen. You can't just be a Native, you got to be a citizen.
Oh, that's a good phrase.
Right. And so, and one of my last questions was, well, can you become a Native if you weren't born in a place? And he said, well, we better, or you better, something like, it was very emphatic. You got to, something like, you better be able to. So.
Yeah, but that's a good point. We got to know
Yeah.
the land. And you got to stay somewhere long enough
Right.
to know it. And
Right.
I think there was a quote from someone who gave a lecture at the Cowie School on lightning bugs, fireflies.
Oh, yeah.
She's like a
Yeah.
self-trained
Yeah.
firefly expert,
Wow.
goes on excursions and on her land out in Macon County. And in the talk, she said, you have to really know your land to know what's gone quiet or dark. And it's this
Right.
idea of like,
Right.
you have to pay attention so that you can understand like what's threatened.
Right.
And with fireflies, it's like become a big thing to go view these
Right,
synchronized
yeah.
shows. But look at all the threats to not just fireflies, but
Right.
so many things that we don't see. And in that talk, it just was like, stop leaf blowing so much, stop mowing your lawn so much, right? All these things. That's
Right.
what I'm talking about. People have helped me
Right.
be a more critical citizen
Right.
and a better citizen, steward of the land, because I'm like, oh yeah, I don't think about beetles at all, ever.
Right.
But yeah, that idea of you have to pay attention to even know what's gone quiet or dark.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it sounds like
Yeah.
Wendell would appreciate that sentiment
Yeah.
as well. That's really
Yeah.
cool you got to interview him.
And then two that are bigger, more well known. English Patient. It's probably my favorite movie. And then I read the book after, it's probably one of the few books that I could say I like them both very well.
Yeah.
Equally, and they're very different. There's parts of the book that had to be cut for the movie. And I just love his language and structures. And then Cormac McCarthy, Suttree is, yeah.
You got to bring Cormac in.
Sure, yeah.
I found out about a Cormac conference in Tennessee.
Yeah,
This summer. I think it already happened.
Oh, I didn't. I knew there's a society.
I think Ron said he was a guest at that.
That doesn't surprise me.
So
yeah,
my brother loves Cormac McCarthy.
Okay.
We've never gotten as into Cormac as he did, but
Yeah,
very, very good writer, legend.
yeah,
So it's cool that it's interesting looking at all these books and thinking about. I try to think of themes of what people are saying.
sure.
And you really love writers that have unique, singular form
Sure.
and sentence structure.
Yeah,
That seems to be a pretty
right.
common thing about all these is they've opened up your own, world for how you can write
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the different ways you can write a story. So I think that's pretty cool when that starts to come through. Gosh, Jim, this was so good. I really appreciate
Well,
it.
thank you.
I'm so
Yeah.
excited to share these
Yeah.
books
Yeah.
because yet again, not a single person has shared these before.
All right.
Every book has been unique
Yeah.
through every interview.
Yeah.
And these make sense for you, I think. And I'm glad I met you. And I don't know if I told you about someone at the Appalachian Studies Conference, a young woman, and I'm blanking on her name now. Oh my gosh. But she works for an environmental organization in Virginia. And she came to your event because she'd met you hours before. And she was like, there's just something about Jim that I want to be around, And you probably don't think of yourself that way,
Yeah.
but you've influenced a lot of people really positively. And I just appreciate you sharing your work and these books with me.
Well, good. It's this end with Emily Dickinson. So I appreciate her poem, and I don't know it well enough to recite it, but I am nobody.
Who are you?
Who are you?
Oh, it's my favorite.
Yeah.
I have that on my desk.
I have
Are
it,
you nobody
yeah.
too?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, oh, that's giving me chills.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I read that, I just needed it.
Right. Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but it helps me. It helps me stay committed to what I'm
Right.
really committed to.
Right.
And to not stray from that.
Yeah.
Most people see the majority of what I do as a fruitless effort because they think of everything as external reward, Truly. I think a lot of my life has been that struggle between
Yeah.
seeing a lot of people chase complete illusion
Right.
and feeling like I should do that because that's what we're taught.
Right.
The admiring bog.
Oh yeah.
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 The frog. Yeah. The frog.
Yeah, because there's just you want that. You want
Right.
everybody paying attention to you,
Yeah.
but it's like so nice. And I'm so glad you brought this up. There was a guy in Franklin I met at the public library, Macon County Public Library, and I was interviewing some folks locally with some stories, and he comes in. Guess how he introduces himself?
I'm nobody.
I'm nobody. And I never learned his name.
Yeah.
And he's telling me his whole life, wild life. He was a medic in the Vietnam War.
Oh, wow.
Came back, was a traveling nurse. He's lived all over, and at the end, he's just like, I think you you can live a good life because look at me, and I'm nobody. And I was just like, you got to be kidding me, But that was such an important moment because it's like another reminder.
Yeah.
You meet, so it felt like that poem
Yeah.
happening in real life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you have the same favorite. I think there's quite a few people out there that would pick that one too.
Yeah.
Gosh, I'm nobody. Yeah.
Who are you?